Many people may say they care about freedom, or they care about liberty, another word for freedom, perhaps said more specifically as that which promotes orderly freedom, that which allows humankind to live their lives in peace, allows them to achieve their most optimum potential, we may say. But what really is freedom? We need to define it, because if we don't know what freedom is, then we very well may lose it. That which is the direct opposite of slavery may be said as liberty, otherwise known as freedom. It is not where one merely is given permission, hence permits, to be free only in certain aspects of their life. It is not where you are dependent upon another individual's whim, in the case of the slave master or a legislative authority. Freedom means being able to live as you please, so long as you do not hinder others' freedoms, otherwise known as live and let live, and that which allows equality. Exercising freedom may be said as exercising rights. Is freedom really embraced by the mere declaration of the slave master, telling the slave that they are now free? Is freedom not their natural condition or birthright, so to require permission? Is freedom or equality created by citing it on fancy pieces of paper with writing? Why must authority provide someone their own freedom if it belongs with them? Would a thief become moral if they gave back what they stole? Fredrick Douglas, a former slave and abolitionist, tells us how by freeing himself he is merely taking what was always his to begin with. He, among others, recognized that true freedom requires the acquisition of sovereignty, otherwise known as recognizing your own freedom or being able to bypass mental slavery beyond also physical slavery. The condition of freedom is really just the absence of slavery. Freedom may also be said as infinite possibility, for which includes the possibility of wrong that may attempt to limit freedom. The fear of chaos then may correlate to the fear of freedom, as would be the case of the pro-slavery advocate who asks who will pick the cotton. Additionally, if the slave rebels against their master, the pro-slavery advocate may use such chaotic acts in order to reinforce the idea that the slave should remain in their state of limited freedom. The justification may even be that the slave is too ignorant, unable to practice self-ownership, even pointing to any mistaken or immoral action. Does one wrongdoing by an individual justify their slavery for continual wrongdoing? Does the wrong actions of one individual justify the punishment upon many? Does the wrong actions of one individual reflect that of everyone else who looks or seems the same? Are human beings merely beasts that need to be caged and kept away from the rest of the world? To reiterate, freedom is the ability to live your life as you so choose, since it belongs to you. However, freedom is not free. Freedom requires self-ownership, for if you don't own you, who does? Freedom, being your birthright property, means that you are responsible for it, therein understanding and practicing self-ownership. In seeing freedom as necessary for our very concepts of individuality or self or ownership or conscience and choice, we may see it then as natural and destined for humankind, as another reinforcing argument of the 19th century abolitionists. They saw hypocrisy in the US government's founding documents, claiming that all men are created equal, despite claiming that slaves, being men that are also capable of being men like any other men, are not equal. William Lloyd Garrison would publicly burn the US Constitution in the streets due to this, as he called it a covenant of death and an agreement with hell.
Is in the hands of the party demagogues who are the tools of the slave power. Corruption is general. Constitutional restraints are as cobwebs. The representatives are the betrayers of the people.
William Lloyd Garrison had been waging war against slavery for 25 years. But tonight, victory seemed inconceivable. Just a few weeks earlier, the President of the United States had sent a massive detachment of federal troops to Boston, all to return a lone runaway slave to captivity. For Garrison, it was yet more proof that the Republic itself had been corrupted at birth, its original sin implanted in a founding document written largely by slaveholders.
And this, the Constitution of the United States of America, is the source and parent of all the other atrocities, a covenant with death and an agreement with hell. So perish all compromises with tyranny. And let all the people say, Amen. Amen. Let all the people say, Amen. Amen. Let all the people say, Amen. Amen.
Lawyer and abolitionist Lysander Spooner, however, claimed that the U.S. Constitution was actually anti-slavery in his writing The Unconstitutionality of Slavery in 1845, but he later wrote extensively about how such documents have no legitimate authority over anyone, detailing many moral and philosophical problems, while considering how nobody gave their explicit consent to its usage in his text No Treason, the Constitution of No Authority in 1867. Therefore, although these two individuals, Lysander Spooner and William Lloyd Garrison, differed on the U.S. Constitution, especially in the beginning, they both agreed that slavery was wrong and that freedom is not determined by the slave master, the government, or their materials. In summary, you must own up to your own freedom. Mortimer Adler, a philosopher and author, said, "Freedom is the emancipation from the arbitrary rule of other men." Wayne Dyer, an author, said, "Freedom means you are unobstructed in living your life as you choose. Anything less is a form of slavery." William Lloyd Garrison, a prominent abolitionist in the 1800s, said, "Liberty for each, for all, and forever." And he goes on to talk about how the Constitution is basically null and void by the laws of God. Henry Clark Wright makes similar points as an abolitionist, and he says, "I abjure allegiance to a constitution that sanctions slavery or war. It has no authority over me, and I shall embrace every opportunity to make it and the government that it is based on the scorn of mankind. Those who have the might have regarded the weak as lawful prey. They act as if might was right. It is an unnatural and unrighteous principle, and is the foundation of all tyranny and slavery. This is the basis of all individual and governmental oppression." Anna Julia Cooper, a sociologist in the 1800s, said, "The cause of freedom is not the cause of a race or a sect, a party or a class. It is the cause of humankind, the very birthright of humanity." Deepak Chopra, an author and doctor, said, "I experience true freedom when I accept, understand, and move on from the conditioning of the past." Stephen Molyneux, a philosopher and author, said, "The only freedom is freedom from illusion." Epictetus, a Stoic philosopher, said, "Is freedom anything else than the right to live as we wish? Nothing else. A free man is only master of what he can master without impediment, and the only thing which we are entirely free to master without impediment is ourselves. Therefore, if you see a person wishing to control not himself but others, you know that he is not free. He has become a slave of his desire to dominate people. No man is free who is not master of himself. Freedom is the name of virtue, slavery of vice. None is a slave whose acts are free." Rose Wilder Lane, a philosopher, said, "Freedom is not a permission granted by any authority. Freedom is a fact. Whether or not this fact is known, freedom is in the nature of every living person, as gravitation is in the nature of this planet. Life is energy. Liberty is the individual control of human life energy. It cannot be separated from life. Liberty is inalienable. As I cannot transfer my life to anyone else, I cannot transfer my liberty, my control of my life energy, to anyone else." Victoria Woodhull, an activist in the 1800s, says that the basis of order is freedom from bondage, not indeed of such order as resigned in Warsaw, which grew out of the bondage, but of such order as reigns in heaven, which grows out of that developed manhood and womanhood in which each becomes a law unto himself. That freedom is a principle, and that as such it may be trusted to ultimate and harmonious social results. That the evils, sufferings, and disabilities of women as well as of men are social still more than they are political, and that a statement of women's rights which ignores the rights of self-ownership as the first of all rights is insufficient to meet the demand, and is ceasing to enlist the enthusiasm and even the common interest of the most intelligent portion of the community. That the principle of freedom is one principle, and not a collection of many different and unrelated principles. That there is not at bottom one principle of freedom of conscience as in Protestantism, and another principle of freedom from slavery as in abolitionism, another of freedom of locomotion as in our dispensing in America with the passport system of Europe, another of the freedom of the press as in Great Britain and America, and still another of social freedom at large. But that freedom is one and indivisible, and that slavery is so also. That freedom and bondage or restriction is the alternative, and the issue alike in every case, and that if freedom is good in one case, it is good in all. The individual is either self-owned and self-possessed, or is not so self-possessed. If he be self-owned, he is so because he has an inherent right to self, which right cannot be delegated to any second person. William Belchilder Green, an abolitionist, said, "Liberty is the power which every human being ought to possess of acting according to the dictates of his own private conscience." Thomas Hodgkin, a philosopher earlier before the abolitionist, said, "Wherever the right of property is placed on a proper foundation, slavery, with all its hateful consequences, is unknown. Whether this foundation is rotten, freedom cannot exist, nor justice be administered." Josiah Warren said, "Liberty defined and limited by others is slavery." So there you hear a bunch of different definitions for understanding what is freedom. But it's one to define it and another to truly put it into action. So how do we really simply exercise freedom? Now I say simple, but I do not mean that it's easy. Just because it's simple and many people can understand what freedom is quite simply does not mean that it is easy to act upon. But perhaps with a greater understanding and with a greater application, it does become easier over time. So let's dive into what we can say is the solution in our next video. Thank you for watching this part of the docu-series Slavery Gone for Good. Be sure to watch our other parts for a more deep understanding as to the nature of truth and action in its fullest extent. If you want to learn more and hear more quotes that have not been discussed in this video, be sure to buy the book Slavery Gone for Good Black Book Edition. This is the most important work in history, and you are part of that work. Do not forget it. As Fredrick Douglas, former slave and abolitionist, said, "Knowledge makes a man unfit to be a slave."